Europe, 1943. At 30,000 feet, the air is minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. A crew of 10 young men rides inside a fragile, unpressurized metal shell, the B-17 Flying Fortress. They are prepared for German Messerschmitts. They are prepared for a wall of deadly anti-aircraft flak. But as they reach the apex of their climb, a silent, invisible killer strikes inside the cabin. Suddenly, the waist gunner drops to his knees. He isn't hit by shrapnel. There is no blood. Yet he is twisting in agonizing pain, clutching his shoulders and knees as if his joints are being pried apart with crowbars. Seconds later, the tail gunner screams into the radio. He can't breathe. He feels a burning fire in his chest, followed by a violent, unstoppable cough. Within minutes, he collapses, unconscious. What was killing World War II's highest flying airmen without ever touching them? For months, military doctors were baffled. It wasn't frostbite, and it wasn't a lack of oxygen. The enemy hadn't fired a single bullet, yet elite crews were being completely paralyzed in midair. Today, we uncover the terrifying, agonizing medical mystery of the chokes and the bends, the hidden physiological nightmare of World War II high-altitude flight. Their aircraft shuddered in silence as invisible forces tore through their bodies mid-flight. To understand how this medical crisis began, we have to look at how rapidly technology outpaced human biology. At the outbreak of World War II, aviation was still in its relative infancy. But within a few short years, the strategic demands of total war pushed aircraft higher than anyone had ever dreamed. To escape the deadly accuracy of ground-based anti-aircraft guns and interceptor fighters, Allied bombers needed to fly higher. The Boeing B-17 and the consolidated B-24 Liberator routinely pushed missions to altitudes between 25,000 and 30,000 feet. To put that into perspective, that is the cruising altitude of a modern commercial airliner and the exact height of the summit of Mount Everest. But there was a fatal flaw. Unlike modern airliners, these World War II bombers were not pressurized. The skin of the aircraft was essentially a thin, drafty aluminum shell. The waist gunners literally stood next to wide open windows to fire their machine guns. Military engineers knew that the air at 30,000 feet was too thin to sustain life. They solved the most obvious problem by providing the crews with crude demand oxygen masks to prevent hypoxia, oxygen starvation. They solved the brutal cold with primitive, electrically heated blue suits that were notorious for short-circuiting. They thought they had covered everything, but they completely ignored a fundamental law of physics, one that treats the human body like a shaken bottle of soda. The mystery began arriving in the medical tents of England and North Africa. Flight surgeons were greeted by returning crews who hadn't taken a single scratch from enemy fire, yet could barely walk. Some were blind. Others were completely paralyzed on one side of their body, mimicking a severe stroke. The culprit wasn't a chemical weapon or a new German death ray.
It was a condition called decompression sickness, or DCS. To understand what was happening to these men, we have to look at what happens to our bodies under atmospheric pressure. Right now, as you sit on Earth, the weight of the miles of air above you forces gases to dissolve into your blood and tissues. The most prominent of these is nitrogen. But look what happens when a B-17 climbs to 30,000 feet in just a matter of minutes. At sea level, the atmospheric pressure is about 13.7 pounds per square inch. At 30,000 feet, that pressure drops by a staggering 70%. When an airman climbed to high altitude in an unpressurized cockpit, his body was that unscrewed soda bottle. These expanding nitrogen bubbles terrorized the human body in two distinct, horrifying ways. The bends was the most common manifestation. But as terrible as the bends were, they were rarely fatal. It was the second manifestation that struck absolute terror. The chokes. The chokes occurred when a massive wave of nitrogen bubbles formed in the venous circulation and migrated directly into the lungs. Without immediate descent, death was practically guaranteed. Desperate for a solution, the U.S. Army Air Forces and the British Royal Air Force turned to wartime physiologists. Scientists realized that nitrogen loves fat. But the experiments also yielded a breakthrough salvation: pre-breathing pure oxygen. If a crew spent 30 to 45 minutes pre-breathing pure oxygen on the tarmac, they could purge enough nitrogen. The introduction of pre-flight oxygen protocols saved thousands of lives. The young men who flew into the freezing skies of World War II faced an unforgiving enemy in the air fleets of the Axis powers. The next time you sit comfortably in a commercial flight at 35,000 feet, remember the teenage waist gunners of 1943.